Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigers.
James Barry is a regular contributor to Fly Culture and fishes for trout, bass and salmon. We look at his fishing career, where he likes to fish and what fishing means to him. He's also a fisheries biologist who looks closely at the behaviour of salmon. As you can see, we've got lots to cover. James speaks with great knowledge about the topics we cover. I think you'll enjoy this one. A warm welcome to the podcast, James. It's great to have you along. How are you doing today?
I'm very good, Pete, and thanks for inviting me along.
Absolute pleasure. For our listeners, can you give us an idea of where you're based, where you fish, and perhaps tell us a little bit about what you would consider your home water, and perhaps tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, sure. So I am based in County Waterford, which is in the southeast corner of Ireland. I'm very lucky in that I'm surrounded by a lot of great fishing, both the river and on the coast. My season kind of generally begins on the River Slaney, which flows out into Wexford, and that has a great spring run of fish. And I spend kind of March and April on that river there before I kind of migrate back to my home water, which is the River Shore. And that's where I'll spend kind of the rest of my season, between the River Shore. Sometimes I'll go over to the River Blackwater as well. And all these rivers are, within touching distance. So I'm extremely fortunate. And then I live on the coast. So as I'm talking to you here now, I'm looking out the window at bass marks that I fish regularly. So I can see what the tide is doing without checking a tide book. So it's always nice to have that so close.
That sounds idyllic. And is it a lucky coincidence you live where you do?
Some would say it was strategic. But Tramore on the coast here where we are is where my wife is from. And it was always the plan to get back here, after we did our time in Dublin, and I was in Scotland for a few years as well. So, it was great to finally get home and have the fishing so close.
Lovely. That sounds absolutely perfect. You talked about salmon there, and I know you've been a contributor to Fly Culture, and we were talking off mic, and it's 4 articles that you've written, and you've written varied stuff. You've written about bonefish, you've written about trout, you've written about bass, and you've written about salmon. But what is your favourite species? Do you have one, or do you go with the conditions and water heights and everything else?
Yeah, that's a question I get quite a lot. Bass anglers seem to ask me, do I like salmon fishing more? And salmon anglers seem to ask me if I like bass fishing more. But it's very much, as you kind of hit the nail on the head there, dependent on season, time, water, temperatures. Like, for example, last week, the water temperatures in the river were hitting around 19 degrees. So, we just leave them alone. And we go to the coast, and generally, you can have some great fishing in that warmer water. But yeah, as you say, I trout fish as well. I wouldn't miss a mayfly season now. The sheeling has got its claws in there, and I couldn't be without a couple of weeks up on sheeling. So that's been fantastic. And I don't know if I have a preference for anything. I kind of feel like, the way people talk about the evolution of an angler, and they say that first you want to catch a lot of fish, then the big fish, and catch them how you want to. I kind of feel like with bass anyway, I kind of spent my 20s really scratching that itch thoroughly. And that eagerness to hit the coast as often as I used to probably isn't there. Whereas with salmon, I don't think I'll ever scratch that itch enough. I don't think any of us will, because there's just so few fish around. And maybe from childhood frustrations not being able to catch the salmon, I'll always keep going back to try to get them. And then trout, I'm really at the bottom of that curve. I just want to catch as many as I can on Loch Sheelan on the dry flies. It's just pure magic, and I'm thoroughly enjoying that. So it really is kind of at the beginning of the learning curve there. I've only done 3 or 4 seasons up there on the dry flies now, but it's just magic.
And what was interesting for me was that you said that bass in your 20s. Does that mean, and often we sort of, when we get into our teenage years and early 20s, you can easily step away from fishing. Does that mean fishing's always been a constant with you in whatever form that has been?
Yeah, I suppose, no, it really hasn't. suppose to answer your question, it'd be good to start at the start. So I would have started fishing quite young. My parents always kind of encouraged me to get outside and get out in the outdoors, but I wasn't very close to rivers or lakes and things like that. And I remember Christmas one year, I was kind of gifted a fishing rod. It was under the tree, and I think that kind of sparked the initial interest. I was about 10 or so, and I used to go out the back just casting this thing in the back garden. No water, just casting this thing. And then I started to accumulate books and magazines, reading through this and trying to find out as much as I could about fishing. But the catch was neither my parents fished. So I was sent to my cousin's house, which was in Carrick-on-Shore, where my mother's from. That's a village on the lower reaches of the river Shore. And within that house, fishing is very, very serious. Like, you walk in the door, there's bamboo rods across the ceiling. There's frame photographs of huge salmon all across the house. There was a vivid memory of this kind of a kipe of a giant salmon head on above the fireplace, and as a kid, that kind of would have captured my imagination a bit, I suppose. And there was about five brothers in the house, and they were all excellent fishermen. And I suppose they took me under their wing. And they were always a phone call away, and William was going to take me out on the river. So my roots at the start were just completely within the river Shore, brown trout fishing. We had this, the tactic you're probably aware of, bubble and fly, so a clear bubble float, and then you'd have your 3 wet flies above it. I think it was like a Greenwell's Glory, black gnat, and a red spinner or something like that would be on the cast. And that's how I cut my teeth trout fishing. Caught a lot of trout doing that, and then obviously, when you're doing all this trout fishing, you see the salmon anglers throwing these big spade lines across the river, and you're like, oh, I really want to try that, and really want to do that. And then I suppose then it came time to kind of go after the salmon. I was taken out to try to catch my first salmon, and that really kind of set the wheels in motion. As first salmon can be from a lot of anglers, there's a special day, and I was only a small grill, it's probably about 3 pounds, but I have an awful memory, but I vividly remember this moment of being taken to the river. I remember it was early start, getting, I wasn't even driving, I was dropped to the house, brought to the river, set up with just a gear spinning, and hooked this grilse. And I still remember my cousin shouting at me, lift the rod, as I struggled to bring in this 3 pound grilse. And from there it was just salmon obsession. I remember coming back down to the village, and it was a small little town, and the doors were always open in the houses, and laying this 4 pound grilse out on the table. My grandmother was there bringing people in to show them the fish. Look, my grandson's caught this fish. So yeah, it was amazing kind of time, and really took off from there. The salmon addiction kind of well and truly was established, and that was kind of it. That was kind of brought me in then, into my late teens. We had the salmon fishing was okay. It was tough, for the brown trout was kind of consistent. Salmon fishing started to kind of decline. We had a big drift net fishery off the west coast of Ireland, and numbers were really, really declining, and the fishing was getting tougher. And I suppose when you're young like that, you're looking elsewhere. You want to be catching fish, and so as the salmon were coming into the river, I was going the other way. I decided let's go down and have a look on the coast, because the coastal fishery here was only 5 or 10 minutes from my house, and that's how I kind of explored that. But that was right into my kind of teenage years. And then the bass just kind of took off. There was that kind of wave of enthusiasm around lure fishing for bass, both in the UK and in Ireland. And I was kind of on that wave, and it was great. It was exciting times. I was even working in the tackle industry for a while. It was fun times. Yeah. So that was kind of how I went from river to coast, I suppose.
And like you say, that's really not the traditional sort of route, but I like it nonetheless. And that must have been deeply thrilling to be able to hook a salmon. And like you say, there is, to people who don't salmon fish, it's a very hard thing to explain, isn't it, when that line suddenly comes to life? I always kind of think, and while you were talking about that, I was thinking, I wonder who's the more surprised when that line does go tight, if it's the angler or the salmon. And how would you put that across to people? who don't salmon fish?
Oh, it's so difficult. I remember trying to convince my friend, who was a dyed-in-wool bass angler, that he should try salmon fishing, and he was reluctant. He was like, I don't know about going to the river and trying this kind of swing and fly, spay cast and fly fishing sort of thing. And I said, I promise you, once you just need to hook one fish, and when you feel the power of that salmon, just that draw, that slow lift, and that moment that this fish is on, it'll change it, and it did, and he hasn't looked back since, and he is. I would say, at the peak of his salmon addiction right now, and he's on the river as much as anyone. So it is great. It's very difficult to describe the feeling of getting one, and that connection you have once you have that fish in your hand, you appreciate the journey that the fish has been on, as well. So it's those little small connections that are quite important, I think, with salmon fishing as well, that can probably attract a lot of people to the sport and the pursuit of wild Atlantic salmon.
Yeah, they're a fabulous, fabulous fish. Tell me about yourself as an angler. How would you describe yourself as an angler then to listeners?
As an angler, probably relaxed enough. I think it depends on the scenario. If I'm fishing on my own versus fishing socially with the guys on a day out, it kind of depends on what species we're after, where we're going, and what we're doing. I do really enjoy my fishing on my own. Just trying to solve the puzzle, where the fish are going, how are they going to behave. And I suppose from an Irish perspective, you really have to commit to the river, the lake, or the coast, or wherever it is that you're doing, to really fully appreciate that. So I love that kind of solo fishing of trying to solve the puzzle. But then on the flip side, if we're going away for a weekend to, let's say, somewhere like the River Bandon or the Blackwater as a group, and I really, really enjoy that. I almost kind of kick back and relax and just take some photos and enjoy it, and lunch. It's more of a social side of things. So there's kind of two sides of the coin to my fishing, really. But a bit of both. Really is how I'd probably describe it: social and solo.
And do you find you fish differently when you're fishing solo?
Yeah, I would think I'm probably a bit more concentrated and focused when I'm on my own, and sometimes I just need to go on my own as well, just to kind of switch off, because when you're out on your own, it's you're fully locked on. You're kind of you kind of get in the rhythm of the coast or the river or wherever it is you are. And you're kind of fully immersed in it. There's no one talking to you. No, you're just there to do, go through the process, commit to the process, and hopefully, something comes of that. So yeah, no, I really, really enjoy that.
Nice. And do you fish a lot? Do you grab, being where you live, does that mean you can grab a couple of hours on the coast, or will you actually plan a day with a group of friends and then get as much fishing out of that period that you've booked, rather than just sort of grabbing a couple of hours here and there? How do you tend to do it, or is it a combination of all?
Yeah, it's all of the above. Really, I was speaking to a friend the other day who I hadn't spoken to in a while, and he said, "Have you been doing much fishing?" And much fishing for me 5 years ago would have been like 5 or 6 days a week, whereas now it's probably one day if I'm lucky. What life gets busy, young families, things like that. But it's more kind of a snatching at 2 hours here, 3 hours there in an evening time now for my bass fishing. Planned trips are, they're not as frequent as they were, but they still happen. We'd still do a planned trip. Like for example, this week I was lucky. I got to go to the Galway fishery over west, to the kind of famous salmon weir there. So those sort of planned trips are days in the diary that always are going to happen, and they're nice and nice and social. But then apart from that, it's jump out for a couple of hours if the tide is right. And I'm very lucky that I can look out the window and say, yeah, okay, this looks good, and kind of have a good group of contacts in the WhatsApp that keeps you updated with how the fishing is going. So you kind of have your finger on the pulse of where to go and when to go, which is always good and helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, say you've got a planned trip organised, and you've got to get in the car to travel. What's on the car? Is it music you're listening to? If it is, what is there? Is there a style? Is there an artist that sets the tone, or is it anything else?
It's usually a flight culture podcast, Pete.
Oh, you're the best.
But we would have music going regularly in the car on the way down. I remember being on a trip up to the Devon years and years back with a mutual friend of ours, and rolling in on the Jeep with AC/DC blaring. And that does bring back some fond memories. So sometimes, depending on mood and conditions on the coast, if you need a bit of need to be roiled up a bit, yeah, AC/DC generally kind of comes on over the speakers, yeah.
Like that. That's a lovely way to start the day. Yeah. And have you ever considered, because I know, I think Boo, who we've had on here, and some other people, funnily enough, the first time I noticed it was on the Devon, and I saw a guy fishing down a pool with iPhone, well, they weren't earbuds, then they were just earphones, listening to music as he went down the pool. Have you ever done that? Have you ever thought about doing it?
Never even thought about doing it until I heard that episode with Boo where you spoke about using headphones. I've never done it, and I can't say I will. I really just enjoy been kind of in the zone on the water, because you'll see things, you'll hear things, especially when I'm bass fishing. You need to be quite you have your wits about you, you know what I mean? You can't have music in your ears if there's waves breaking around you, and you might want to try to hear birds hitting the water, things like that. So no, I haven't delved into the music in the ears yet, but maybe I could see it working, maybe with night fishing or something like that. I know a couple of people that have done it for night fishing for bass. It's good company, but no, not yet anyway.
No. So, and you mentioned spey casting earlier. I assume you're a fan of it. What is it that you like about it so much?
Just the motions of the cast itself. I absolutely love the spey cast, the rhythm of the cast, and the touch and go nature of spey casting is just. It's fantastic. It kind of fully draws you into the process, into that present moment, which is really nice. As I said, I used to kind of conventionally fish for salmon when I was younger, and as soon as I kind of picked up the double hander and got some lessons with that, I knew that I was probably never going to go back to spinning or doing anything like that ever again. It's something that that kind of grabs you, and it's just maybe the motion of the cast that kind of gets under your skin, and yeah, it's just a magical kind of process, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, it is pretty special. I guess in some respects that could almost lend itself to music as well. But like you, I'm sort of music curious on the river and haven't gone down that route yet. But yeah, the more I talk about it, the more I think about it. But casting brings me on to tackle. And do you have a Hall of Fame piece of tackle? Is there a rod that you've either owned and regretted selling, or a piece of tackle that you still love to use to this very day?
Yes. So I like tackle as much as everybody, and I have many rods and reels to show for that. But one rod in particular that kind of has a real kind of favorite place with me is my G Loomis NRX, and I absolutely love that rod. It's just that perfect action. And believe it or not, that rod I've fished everywhere with that rod. I've had every type of species on that rod, from bonefish in Mexico to bass on the Copper Coast to salmon on the shore. So it's it's really kind of done it all. So I have a lot of fond memories of it. And I had it rebuilt last year from a local rod builder here, and he did such a beautiful job on it. And it doesn't look anything like the original blank anymore, and he really redid the cork and everything. It's just it's a super bit of kit. I'll never ever part with it. And actually, I picked up a little eco base fly rod 4 years ago now. This thing was about $50, I think, for Loch Sheelan. And I thought, I'll just use it the first time I go up, and I'll upgrade. But this rod, it's a beautifully kind of soft actioned rod, and it's absolutely perfect for the dry fly fishing in up on Loch Sheelan. So I'm struggling to part with that rod, to be honest. I thought it would be just a 1 week wonder, but it's funny, these little gems that you can uncover. And then apart from that, I absolutely love my Vision double handers, and my Exos are ones I don't think I'll ever part with. They just really are fantastic rods. I could probably keep going, Pete, but I better stop.
I tell you what. There's some nice connoisseurs' choices there, and some uncovered gems there as well, like you say, with the Echo rod and everything else. And funnily enough, I bought a Loomis, an old one, a 9'8" weight that I'm waiting for somewhere or other to put that to use. And then I was talking to my friend Perry recently, and he wanted a smaller rod for the little stream that we fished together, and we found again another Loomis one, and that's a name that keeps coming up at the moment that was so at the forefront, which we're not hearing so much about now, are we?
Yeah, it's interesting that. Yeah, but they really are fantastic piece of kit.
Yeah. So tell us, what do you like to do away from fishing? What are your other hobbies and passions? Do you have any that you like to indulge in when you're not standing in a river somewhere?
Yeah, so I suppose I do. I'm a big photography fan, complete amateur, but I really like the photography as a hobby. Some nature shots, landscape shots. During the winter time, I'd often go out and sit in cold corners of the coast, just trying to get a nice sunset shot and things like that. So I really enjoy photography on the side. And yeah, apart from that, no, it's pretty busy with the young family, so hobbies kind of get pushed to the side for a while anyway. But yeah, I do a bit of fly tying and that, but that's probably under the big umbrella of fly fishing.
Yeah. And you're speaking to somebody who's a fan of your photography, because obviously it's accompanied your work. I particularly liked the bass photography that you had in your piece there, and I think, if I remember rightly, there was somebody standing on a rock casting, and it just summed it up. Listeners won't be able to see this, but James has that actual photograph. Now he's pointed it out behind me, and it epitomizes for me bass fishing perfectly. And I know I carried it in the magazine. It was an absolute beauty. So, and so do you shoot? Because obviously we've noticed that camera phones have moved on dramatically. Does that mean that you are starting to look at those a little bit more, or do you prefer to pack a more traditional camera with you and work with that?
Yeah, no, like iPhones are fantastic now, and I think they're great for a kind of quick shot of a fish. But if I like, say for one example, if I'm going out with the guys for one of those kind of planned days where we're fishing together, I absolutely pack the DSLR. And it's just the range that it offers so much more than an iPhone ever will, and it's just they're just far superior in my opinion. But with regards to just a quick snap for a memory, yeah, iPhone is perfectly fine. As I said, you don't need a fancy camera to document your day. You just need the bare minimum. And the camera and the bigger camera is more of a hobby and a kind of thing on the side, so that I enjoy doing. So there's no need for the bigger cameras, but I do think they offer just that little extra element and a little bit more to the photo than an iPhone will not.
Yeah. Absolutely. So moving on, what do you do for work? Because I sort of kind of know the answer to this, but I think it's very pertinent to our conversation. Would you like to tell listeners a little bit about your work?
Yeah. So I'm a fishery scientist by trade. I would have I started in an undergraduate in environmental science. From there, I specialised in zoology, and I was never A grade student. I was just kind of went through school, got along, and it was in my third year of college where I was even questioning, whether college was for me. I met a lecturer there by the name of Tom Cross, who was a salmon geneticist, and he kind of opened the whole world of science and conservation genetics to me. And I went down that route, kind of studying salmon populations in third year and fourth year in my zoology degree. And from there, I went to Aberdeen. I did a fisheries master's over there. And then I took a year off to just fish around for a while because I was a bit tired of college. And then I ended up going back to Scotland, where I did a PhD in Glasgow in kind of fish behaviour and fish evolution and things like that. So it was that was an interesting couple of years. So that has me back here now, back in Ireland, working as a research scientist, and I work on the work can be really varied, Pete, to be honest. Just to give you an example, I've worked on projects looking at fish passage over barriers. I've worked on projects linked to marine protected areas and salmon and sea trout movement at sea, which obviously is fascinating. So for an angler to get to see where these fish go after we release them, and most recently is a really special project in that we're doing a kind of a climate brown trout behaviour study in Loch Sheelin, which involves catching and tagging those fish and seeing where they're going. So it's really nice. I'm very lucky that kind of my professional life and personal passions kind of overlap considerably, depending on projects, of course, but generally they're pretty well aligned. And there is times where the lines blur slightly, but it is fantastic work for kind of an obsessed fly fisherman. Yeah, so it's good.
Do you think that was always meant to be, given your passion for fishing? Do you think it was consciously or subconsciously there that work would take you in a direction aligned with fishing in some way, shape or form?
Yeah, I think so. I think the pivotal moment for me with regards kind of pursuing a career in science and conservation was I was about 16 or 17, and there was the big drift net fishery off the west coast of Ireland. There was lots of question marks over it being a mixed stock fishery, so it was taking fish from, we'll say, your rivers in the south of England, taking salmon from the rivers in France. And I met it was actually at a fly fishing show in Dublin, and I met a lot of scientists at that, and they spoke to me about how they were figuring out where these salmon were from and these different nets, using this evidence to really kind of get the net fishery shut down and closed because it was causing such an impact on the salmon populations. And I just went away from that thinking, God, that is fantastic work. I'd love to be able to do something like that. But then, as I said, that kind of died off, and it didn't reignite until the end of college when I actually met some of the professors again. So I suppose it was probably subconsciously there. And I think it's I think you find there's quite a over the years I've met kind of quite a few conservationists, activists, scientists that kind of have that love for fishing, that kind of inspire them to pursue those sort of careers. So it's I say it was probably subconsciously there all along.
Yeah, and you talked earlier about the connection with the fish when you hold it, and with your work as well. Does that mean it's made you respect your quarry even more?
Yeah, I think so. I suppose the nature of the work kind of has you questioning the cogs within the ecosystem, and you're trying to answer these important questions and trying to gain evidence to protect these species that you care a lot about. But I understand that for a lot of people, it's just you just want to go fishing, catch fish, and release it, and that's perfect, But then there's another few kind of dyed-in-wool people that are very, they want to know more. They want to try to understand the system and things that are happening. And I probably fall into that bracket of probably wanting to know much more about the species, what they do, where they go, and what they need, and things that can affect them. So it absolutely builds up a great respect for the species, and it has you questioning some kind of conservation style questions that can be difficult at times. You kind of have to kind of find that balance. But it does 100% make you respect the quarry more. And a lot of the time as well, some of the most enjoyable projects are working with stakeholders such as anglers. So I love those projects where you're engaging with the anglers and kind of letting them know about the climate issues that may be facing species such as brown trout, or some of the marine survival issues that salmon might be having at sea. And that for me is what I really enjoy, is trying to communicate this across to anglers and concerned anglers about their species that they love to chase.
And have you noticed that anglers are a little bit more aware regarding conservation issues? And at the moment we've not got a great deal of water, and at the back end of last year I found myself not really fishing for salmon in any meaningful way because I'd felt that they'd had a tougher time. Water temperatures have been high up until we've had some rain recently, and so trout have sort of been off the menu as well. Do you find the community as a whole is a lot more aware of these sorts of things and acts accordingly as a result of it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a growing awareness of the threats to our fish species, and to be honest, I think companies such as Patagonia have really done a fabulous job of kind of promoting the wild fish, wild waters. They've some fantastic videos. They've really put this front and center. And they have that kind of activist edge as well, which I really like, is that they really try to get people concerned about their home waters, and that's ultimately where it's at. And I think there's that kind of wave of kind of concern and conservation minded anglers especially among the young anglers that I see nowadays, far more aware of catch and release, far more aware of high temperatures, exactly like that for kind of catching salmon, we'll say, or from the salmonic perspective. And for example, when I was on Loch Sheelin during the Mayfly this year, there's a lot of the younger anglers are very interested in the ecosystem, climate change, how it's going to affect their trout fishing, things like that, which is fantastic to see. And it's kind of it motivates me, I suppose, then to really try to communicate the message as best we can. Yeah.
And you're sort of looking at hard data, and are you looking at that thinking things can be reversed or halted in any way, or should we continue to do everything that we possibly can? And does the outlook, I guess climate is going to be an overriding issue as well, and you've talked about the nets and getting nets taken away, but should we continue to be concerned, and should we continue to try and do everything we can to highlight what these fish have to contend with right now?
Absolutely. I think the scale and complexity of problems facing, especially Atlantic salmon, pose many unique challenges. There's so many vested interests from various places. We have issues at sea. We have issues in our rivers. So it's death by 1,000 cuts. I think there's people working in the science field, the research field, which are gathering really important empirical data on where these fish are going, what they're doing. I think there's really important kind of conservation messages been communicated, which is fantastic. And then there's the activists, a real kind of edge stuff, really pushing people, which I think is brilliant. What I love to see is all that working in tandem. I don't like to see the sometimes the cross fighting that can happen. And I think everyone is such an important cog to play in that kind of conservation wheel. And it's important that we work together on that. And to be honest, it is, if you look at 100 years down the line or 200 years down the line, salmon are seriously in trouble with, we'll say, regards what's happening in the North Atlantic. And I would have concerns, absolutely concerns. But the biggest questions for me at the moment, with the kind of a research hat on, would be what's happening at sea. So a lot of the research is kind of pointing towards a complete regime shift in the ecosystem in the North Atlantic. So what that means, things are changing out of our control. Currents are changing. Bait fish are moving. Salmon just aren't surviving as well as they did at sea. So we're all well aware that, I think everyone knows this quote now, that for every 100 salmon that went to sea in the 80s, we used to get about 20 adults back. But now we're in a case where every 100 salmon smolts that go to sea from our rivers, we're only getting between 2 and 3, maybe 5 back. So it's been a huge decline in the marine survival. And trying to answer those questions is pivotal at the moment. But then again, on the flip side, back to our rivers, that's the foundation of everything. Without good, clean, cold water in our headwaters, we're at nothing, because without that foundation there for the juveniles to actually grow and go to sea, then it's bad news. But I think we know the threats, we just got to keep beating the drum and just keep shouting, as much as we can. So I do remain positive for salmon. They've survived a lot of challenges that climate and changes have put in front of them in the past. But I think the rate of change is the scary thing about this. It's how fast it's happening and whether they can adapt in time. But again, we just got to do what we can to try to make people aware and, raise those issues.
Yeah. And I've often thought that if you'd said to me, if you stopped fishing for a year, or they stopped fishing for a year or 2 years, that would help the fish. But I guess the issues are too great, and that's going to have minimal impact anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, the fishing closures, from an angling perspective, Pete, you're talking, is it, in rivers and things?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so I have thoughts about the closures of rivers. I don't know how helpful they can be. So we know there's a certain we see rivers get closed here because there's a low number of adult salmon returning to the river. And for me, I feel like when you take anglers away from that river, you kind of lose that knowledge, and it almost becomes a lost river, because we don't have any idea of what's coming into it. We don't have any idea of, has it been a good year for the adult salmon? How are they up in the spawning beds? Because the anglers are out and about, they're looking, and they have a kind of a feel and a rhythm for the river. And a full closure sometimes worries me for that reason, in that we don't have, eyes on certain rivers. And I kind of feel like some rivers might get lost. So I'm very much for kind of a catch and release, low impact type kind of closures, to even be aware that there's some fish coming through the system. And for me, that's quite important. But sorry, I've gone off in a rabbit hole now. I don't know what the original question was, but yeah, I don't fully agree with fishery closures. Maybe at sea. Just to turn that around as well, the fishing that happens at off Greenland and things like that I feel can be a bit of an issue with our fish coming back to our rivers. Yeah.
Do you think that's something that will change then, that they will start looking at these fishing things? Because I'd heard a story, and you'll be much better equipped to answer this than my simple thoughts, but that a lot of the sand eels and everything else were being fished out as well, so the fish were having to travel much further to feed and coming back later as a result. Does that mean we should be looking at these fishing practices, as you say, around Greenland, and perhaps that may be something that we should have some form of effort to highlight with people?
Yes, absolutely. And the NGOs, government agencies, and everybody kind of working in this game are currently trying to track those smolts to their feeding grounds. They're trying to create, migration corridors, migration routes to where they're going to the feeding grounds to better understand the timing and distribution when they're in the ocean. So there's hopefully going to cut down on interactions with any kind of pelagic trawlers and things like that. The actual netting of adult fish at the sea is mainly off Greenland, and I know that the government agencies and the NGOs have kind of curtailed a lot of that netting at sea, but that's mainly the Canadian salmon that kind of feed up around those parts, and I know that they work tirelessly trying to reduce quotas and reduce catches of those adult fish. But for me, it's very difficult to when you're looking at this from far enough away, you can kind of see that the fishermen have their argument to keep their fish if the anglers are keeping their fish. So it's not until the anglers put down their rods and say, okay, let's practice full catch and release that they kind of have an argument for the netsmen to fully put down their nets.
That's a great point, actually. Thank you for making that. Is there anywhere that listeners can have a look at to find out a little bit more about what is happening and about some of those issues that you have highlighted?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably be aware of the Atlantic Salmon Trust. They do a lot of tracking up around the north of Scotland, off both the east and west coast. They do some fantastic work. And then obviously the Atlantic Salmon Federation in the North America as well. They're another kind of like the American form of the Atlantic Salmon Trust for all the world. And then there's also an Icelandic NASF, I think it is, who also have are vocal with regards the plights of Atlantic salmon at sea at the moment. And then there's obviously the agents and the government agencies which are in the middle of all the research as well. You know what I mean? It's all kind of pointing towards the right place, and kind of this collaborative effort is definitely the way to go to answer these questions. But yeah, that'd be a good kind of starting point. The Atlantic Salmon Trust website, lots of really, really informative stuff on there.
Great, thank you for that. I'll try and include some links as well at the end for people to have a look at. A couple of quick fire sort of questions, really. We're going to move back into fishing and your fishing. Still water or moving water?
Oh, moving water, yes. Can't beat swinging a fly, and I'd say that as well for my bass fishing too. It's probably my best, my most enjoyable bass fishing is kind of drifting to fish.
Nice. I guess this is more trout related, but dry fly or nymph?
Oh, dry fly. I still get a complete surprise. When I'm fishing on Sheelan, I still get pure shock when a fish actually comes up and takes my dry fly. It's just unbelievable.
Boat or bank?
Oh, bank. Yeah, absolutely. Always on the shore. We used to laugh here around here saying that boat fishing was cheating, but I've since taken to a boat in recent years, so I can't really say that anymore.
And when it comes to salmon, let's move back to that. And we talked about dries over nymphs for you. Do you like to riffle hitch?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been delving more into in recent years. I gave it a go for the first time on the Galway Weir about 2 years ago, and pulled out the single hander, and I was just kind of hitching the fly over a nice slack piece of water, and I had a fish come up and jump straight over the hitch and miss it by quite a half a foot, and you probably would have heard me shouting from there. I was just in shock. So it kind of set the fire under me to give riffle hitching more of an effort. I've tried it on my own local river as well, but I've only had slashes of interest, and I haven't really stuck at it long enough to give it its due.
Do you think that's a confidence thing, that you need the fish around? And I know I've thought about it at home, and I just don't have the fish to go at to have the confidence to do it. But have you found that the case as well, that fish are around so you can do it? And are there, for listeners, I guess, as well, are there conditions that you like to riffle hitch in? Is it lower water generally, or will you try it in a variety of water heights?
Yeah, so the reason I tried it for the first time was up on the Galway Weir. So it's a fishery where there's a lot of fish around, and that's what kind of gave me the spur on to give it a go. And like you say, it's nice to know that the fish are there. Um, Conditions wise, I like generally quite calm. If there's too much of a breeze on it, I won't actually be able to see my fly. And there is that kind of perfect kind of glidey water that you can just see that nice V wake coming from behind your fly that I do like. If you do it right on the tops of riffles, you sometimes can lose your fly unless it's very close quarters. But I do love that glidey kind of water just at the tail out, where you can really see that V wave coming around. It certainly gets the heart rate, and if you know that there's fish there, so it's exciting, and it's kind of another form of fishing which I really enjoy is stripping little mini sun rays, because it's quite visual as well. You usually see the take, and it's similar types of water, where you might get those fish on the little sun rays. But 100%, it's definitely down to confidence, knowing that the fish are there. If I was in Iceland or something like that, I'd probably riffle hitch all the time, because you're covering over these fish because you can see them as clear as day. But unfortunately, in some of our Irish rivers, we just don't have the density of fish. So yeah, it's nice to know that they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've talked about your love of bass fishing, your trout fishing and salmon fishing. Have you travelled for fishing? And by that, I mean, have you gone abroad? And if so, do you have a favourite destination?
Yeah. So yeah, the traveling and the destination fishing is something I really enjoy, but it's very much the exception, not the norm. I think when you travel somewhere, you kind of go all in on that destination while you're there, and I really like that. You could fully immerse, however brief that might be, just a couple of days or all week. So you kind of get to know a new part of the world that kind of comes familiar, knowable and close, like you would with your home waters. But then later you go back home, and it all seems so mysterious and foreign again. So it's that kind of push and pull of wanting to kind of know an area and get to know an area, and also be blown away by somewhere completely new, which I think will always have me kind of looking to where I might be able to go for a destination fishing. But I'm by no means well travelled angler, but I have been to a few places. And there's many more on the bucket list. But if I had to pick, it probably we've had a couple of shockers where we've been fishing and we've just been blown out by storms, so I can't really comment on how the fishing would have been. But I really thoroughly enjoyed my trip to Mexico. I really loved the bone fishing. I just really enjoyed that. There was one day in particular where we weren't on the boats, and we pulled up at this slipway, and the two of the group went out on the boat looking for a permit, and two of us stayed local. And I actually wrote about this in Fly Culture, and we just mooched around the margins casting at these bonefish. They weren't big or anything like that, but we had plenty of fish, and it was just great fun, and I absolutely love that. It's one kind of destination place that kind of sticks out in my mind. And apart from that, it's there's lots of things hopefully coming down the line that I'll be able to get to experience what I'm traveling about.
So tell us a couple of those. I'll give you a dream destination for freshwater and a dream destination for saltwater. What two would you choose?
Only two. I often joke with my friends that if my numbers were to come up in the lotto, that I'm going to disappear for 12 months. I have this like dream 12-month trip, planned. So it would start in Argentina. You do your few weeks down the Rio Grande, maybe go to the Caribbean, do some bonefish tarpon, and permit. Maybe jump to Bolivia then for your Dorado. Where are we then? Probably May and June. Probably let's go to the Alta, maybe Okanga, something like that. Back over to Alaska, maybe even BC for some steelhead, and then finish up with some GT down the Seychelles. How does that sound?
I think that is the most comprehensive answer I've ever had, and I think you've covered just about everything. And I think that's a very, very good choice as well. So, yeah, I'm with you. If my lottery numbers come up at the same time, I'm with you as well. So that sounds perfect. Now, we said at the beginning that you'd written 4 articles for Fly Culture. Is writing a way of expressing your love of fishing and, I guess, since we've been speaking photography as well?
I think so. When I think about that question, I suppose it's probably more based on the photography, Pete. I really, really enjoy trying to put words to those pictures, and trying to kind of capture that moment. And I suppose, it's a lovely memory to have in a publication such as your own, to be able to go back and look at those. Social media posts can be quite fleeting. You can try to convey a message in that, but it's you can really kind of say everything you need to say in a kind of an article form like that. And I really, really enjoy the format of fly culture, where you're kind of let loose to you don't have to try to describe a technique or a tactic or something like that, but you just describe the fishing and the moments you might have along the day, which I really enjoy. And maybe it is a bit of a way of just kind of getting back to fishing, maybe during the winter months and things like that. I'd love to write more, but it is one of those time things. And I always say that I'd love to have more time, but often when I sit down to do one of those articles, I've been going through the photos and, remembering the trip, or remembering that day on the water, or that experience, or whatever like that. And you write that in sometimes 5 minutes. You could almost, just get it out, and then obviously re-edit it and try to add some structure to it. But those sort of articles, for me anyway, they flow in comparison to articles, scientific articles, or research papers that I might have to be, real tedious and take a long time. So I like writing about fishing, and the fact that you can just flow very quickly, and the words can end up on the paper very, very quickly. So it's really nice. Yeah, I do enjoy it.
Well, I've enjoyed publishing your work and photographs as well. So thank you very much for those. What advice would you give? And we try, as you well know, to champion aspiring writers, photographers, artists, whatever we possibly can, to help support and, of course, pay them. What advice would you give an aspiring writer if they wanted to sit down and write about a day on the water?
God, I don't know if I'm well qualified for giving any advice, Pete. But the small moments, I do think they can make an article. Just those little things, and how they fit into the story along the day. May it be a awful cup of coffee, or something funny that might have happened, along the way. It's just those make the difference, I think, with a nice little story. And just making sure you really like the topic too helps, I think.
And something you said to me, which was really interesting, I think I'm similar, that I would describe myself as an emotive writer. And you said that the words flow out. And I find very often if something happens, something triggers, and that allows that process to be a whole lot easier. Would you say to listeners that if you'd had a really good day and it was fresh in your mind, to get it down straight away? Or, it may be that you've gone and walked or you've gone fishing somewhere and it's popped into your head. But the key, would you say then, is to get it out and get the words down to flesh out an idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I sometimes even write notes down on my phone. I really want to write an article about my association water, and starting kind of those early years, and then kind of going full circle to fishing with the people that taught me how to fish all those years ago. And small moments, little brief things that happen on the riverbank, like giving the person who brought me to catch my first salmon, I gave him a fly recently. I said, try that. And he caught a salmon on it. And it was just one of those full circle moments. I went back to the car. I was like, that's kind of a cool idea for an article, So I always jotting down little ideas, things you might see, maybe the imperfections on your own little home fishery, which kind of make it perfect. Those little things I always try to write down, and even sometimes probably never use, but just have them in notes. And, with the thought that sometimes they might lead to something in the future,
Yeah, great. you talked about imperfections and why you love them so much, but for your home water from that standpoint. But what about from, and we've touched on social media very, very briefly. Have you a day fishing that everything hasn't gone or something hasn't gone to plan, something that went spectacularly wrong? Have you got a story there that you might like to share with us?
Yeah, I probably have more bad days than good days, to be honest with you. And we've all had some howlers when we've been on the water. But I'm trying to think of one that might make an interesting story for the listeners. I can think of one, but it's actually a good fish story. But we're kind of unprepared. But it was a bit of a disaster. What happened was I went to my local association water on the River Suir, my home river, and it was mid-May. That week, there had actually been no signs of salmon on the water. It'd been particularly quiet, and I actually brought my trout rod with me, which is unusual because we usually just have the silver blinkers on when we're on the association water, and the trout generally get a look in. But there'd been a fantastic rise of trout the last couple of nights, and I was like, "Look, guys, I'm going to bring the trout rod." And I just grabbed the trout net, I stuck it in the back behind my belt, and I headed up the river. But I brought the double hander, and I just said, "All right, I'll have a quick run through this little section of river, which is known as the Bubble, lovely, bubbly, streamy water, and it's usually a good spot for a salmon." I put the trout rod up, got in, started swinging my fly down, and I got to the end of the pool, and sure enough, had no salmon. And I just put the rod on my shoulder and started walking back up the pool. There's a bit of slack water, and believe it or not, if you walk it back up, sometimes you can get a take as you bring it up along the edge of the slow water. And next thing I just put it on my shoulder, walking back, and I nearly ended up going back into the river. And next thing I'm connected to a big spring salmon. This is like mid first week of May. The river's high, and what happened then is obviously I'm connected to this salmon. All I have is my trout net, so it's completely bringing a sword to a gunfight. And I ended up going down the river after this fish. One of the local guys appeared behind me. It was spinning, and he stopped to watch. And the usual comments, "Geez, that net's not going to be much use for you," and all this. So in pure frustration, I lifted the net, threw it back, nearly hit him on the bank, because obviously I was just so frustrated. I couldn't believe that I had hooked a springer and I had no landing net, and the river was big, and it was going to be difficult to net this fish. So there I am in my river, connected to the biggest salmon I've ever hooked with no net, and it's big water. So eventually, after I would think maybe 40 minutes, I ended up 200 yards downstream. I get this salmon. It's meter long, absolute incredible fish. I don't think I'll be doing well to ever catch one this big again. And I had to try to tail it, and I remember like multiple attempts. Absolute disaster. I thought I was going to break the rod. Eventually, got a grip of the tail, and for whatever reason, I grabbed, in those moments you just do silly things. I grabbed the leader, and I had a hand on his tail and a hand on the leader, and I'm just looking at this fish, and I was like, "God, this is incredible." A bar of silver, and next thing, just the tail started kicking. The fly popped out of my hand, and I just couldn't hold it, and he just slipped away. So it was one of those moments that I have a witness, as I say, that was on the bank who watched it all, and it was just one of those moments I would have loved to have had the picture, only for that bloody trout net. So the moral of the story is, as my friend says, never bring the trout rod salmon fishing. So lesson learned. And but it was a great moment nonetheless, and I did get to see the fish, and I held the fish, although it was brief. So yeah, that was probably one of my biggest howlers.
And did the guy in the bank throw the net back at you afterwards, after you attacked him with it?
Yeah. It was a funny moment. He still brings it up from time to time. Yeah.
So tell me, what do you have planned for the rest of this season? Have you got anything, or are you just going with the flow?
Completely going with the flow. We'll see what the weather and the wind does. At the moment, I have some friends up on the river shore. As I said, the salmon fishing is pretty slow this year. I think at the moment we're currently down. Catches are down about 70% on previous years, so it just seems to be a bad year. I would think that when the rain comes, I'll be very close to the river, but in the meantime, I'll be on the coast. We've got some big spring tides on the way now. I have the tide book here right beside me, so I'm looking at dates there that I could hopefully circle and try to get out for a couple of evening sessions. And I'm also thinking about getting out to try for some sea trout on a local river, so that should be good fun.
Lovely. It sounds like a wonderful mix for you. We've spoken for an hour now, and I've enjoyed every second. There was so much more I would like to speak with you about. But how, James, can people connect with you? You take, as I can be testament to, beautiful photographs. How can people find you on your social media handles?
You'll find me on Facebook under my name, and I'm also on Instagram, Riffle to Reef. Yeah.
You've heard it, folks, so go have a look at those pictures. I'm going to try and ask you to send me the picture of the bass angler on the rock as well. I think that we use when we put this, I'm sure I've got it somewhere, but when we put this podcast out, we'll use that picture if that's okay, because it's such a beautiful one. And keep enjoying your fishing. I hope you'll keep sending articles, because I enjoy reading them, and I know our readers do as well. So please keep doing that. Please keep up the wonderful work that you're doing and keep us informed with that. And thank you, James, so much for being a guest on the Fly Culture podcast today.
Thanks very much, Pete.
Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture podcast. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as me. And as ever, there will be plenty more coming down the line. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.